Our guest is Joel Armin-Hoiland, the founder of Climate Finance Solutions, a global advisory and consulting firm that helps various entities, generally a lot of startups actually.
We worked in pretty much every industry vertical that's related to climate, including a significant amount of work in critical minerals and materials.
They only started in 2020, and so far they've already secured $1.6 billion in funding opportunities.
We've secured over $1.6 billion in funding for our clients. We've done that with an over 90% success rate in terms of dollars awarded versus dollars pursued. Just don't talk about climate in these applications, period. They are actually literally doing Control F. Typically what we try to tell our clients is to
Hey everyone, Silas here again with a special issue episode of the Clean Techies podcast. And the reason we're here is in case you missed it, the Trump administration recently announced that they're going to put roughly $1 billion of grant funding to work in the critical minerals space. And this includes across various stages of technology, whether that's pilot or upscale production, across different types of technology, and across various types of minerals. So with all of this having the stated intention of shoring up domestic supply chain in the critical mineral space. So we decided we want to bring on an expert to talk about this announcement, to discuss what's included, who can apply, and general tips on how to win these grants. So our guest is Joel Armin-Hoiland, the founder of Climate Finance Solutions, a global advisory and consulting firm that helps various entities, generally a lot of startups actually, to land and win climate-related grants. That's all they focus on is climate stuff. And they are global, so no matter where you're listening from, he and his team can help you out. They are actually very good at what they do too. They only started in 2020, and so far they've already secured $1.6 billion in funding opportunities. So that's a really, really impressive number. Before the show does start, we have a big shout out to Earth Tech Talent for sponsoring this episode. If you need help hiring top talent, the kind that can help you execute on grants like these, you're working on this type of technology, but you don't want to pay absurdly high recruitment fees, reach out to Earth Tech Talent today to get started. All right, enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the pod, Joel. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Good to be here.
Glad to have you, man. How are things in sunny California?
It's sunny outside. I'm sitting here looking at the redwood forest up here in
A
Humboldt,
little
so
jealous.
it's pretty nice.
I've developed a much deeper appreciation for California after my recent trip there. So I'm in Wisconsin where the summer is already ending and it's only August. So what we're having fall vibes are starting pretty soon here. We'll have the pumpkin spice lattes and everything. But anyways, man, we wanted to have you on because you had a really good LinkedIn post the other day talking about this critical minerals notice of intent is the technical term, but basically, in summary, the government wants to put about $1 billion roughly towards basically promoting mineral extraction and refinement, I think. So we're going to dive into that today. And I think you have a pretty good handle on it. So I think that's the core reason we're going to bring you on. But before we get into that, can you just give us a quick intro to yourself and what your company does?
Absolutely. So I'm the founder and CEO of Climate Finance Solutions. We are a global consulting firm that helps climate-related companies and organizations secure large-scale, non-dilutive public funding, which is basically a fancy way of saying that we help folks get government grants. We also have done work in incentives and tax credits, government secured debt as well. We are a global company. So as mentioned, I'm based here in California, but we have a team of 27 people all across the globe in North America, Africa, and Europe. Pretty sizable contingent in Europe now. And we provide services really throughout the life cycle of funding. So everything from funding identification and assessment. We've actually developed some software platforms that help do real-time grant monitoring. And we do funding strategy, funder engagement, so engaging directly with funding agencies through both formal and informal means. Obviously, proposal development is a core element of what we do, and not just kind of taking a project that that companies have fully figured out, but really helping with project design, project scoping, strategic partnership development, consortium building, and we also offer post-award management services as well. I think relevant to this call, we are focused only in climate, but we define climate very broadly, and we also are sector agnostic. So we work in pretty much every industry vertical that's related to climate, including a significant amount of work in critical minerals and materials. And we also really specialize in large-scale funding opportunities. So opportunities not just in the millions, but also in the tens and hundreds of millions as well. We secured several grants in the multi-hundred million range, a lot of grants in the high tens. So this kind of these kind of opportunities that we're
Yeah.
talking about with these NOIs are very much right within our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
It does take a specialized set of experience and folks on the team that are a bit different from the typical grant funding opportunities. And with all this funding that we've secured over 1.6 billion in funding for our clients since 2020. And we've done that with an over 90% success rate in terms of dollars awarded versus dollars pursued.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. We definitely have to clip that. I would say so. One thing, just for me, just to help me understand, like, who are the typical people that are actually pursuing these grants? Is this usually startups? Is it big organizations? Like, where does it usually fall?
Yeah. So the typical folks that will hire us are usually technology providers or technology creators or innovators on the kind of startup side or small and medium sized entities. So in many cases, they are a Series A, B, C company, but we also have worked with a really wide range of other types of entities. And even if those are the companies that are kind of paying for our work and are the primary folks that we're kind of serving as our clients, these large scale projects involve a really incredibly wide and diverse array of folks. So we're working with large scale industrial players and academic institutions and national labs and local governments and tribal entities. We do actually have we do some work, quite a bit of work as well with tribal governments directly.
Okay, nice. So it's a pretty wide range of things, and I can imagine the reason this service is needed for anybody who's maybe not familiar. Like, this is probably, this isn't some startup form, an Airtable. You just fill out a couple questions, right? This is a relatively in-depth process, and you got to kind of know how the cheese is made in order to get successful at it. So it's really cool that you guys have done this. And you said what was that? 1.2 billion or 1.6?
1.6 billion. Yep.
And that's just since 2020 when you started.
Yep. Founded the
Wow, that's
company
crazy.
in January of 2020.
Wow, that's really good. That's awesome. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about is you said you kind of define climate a little bit broadly. So just out of curiosity, what are the kind of core buckets of that for you guys? Because I think there's a lot of sometimes debate. What is a climate tech at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, like at the most broad level, I think that we work with both mitigation and adaptation. So some folks that like work in quote unquote climate kind of limit themselves to just mitigation solutions. I mean, we actually like or prefer cross-cutting solutions, but we'll work with adaptation solutions. And actually, the majority of really great solutions on the mitigation side really are cross-cutting solutions. I mean, you're talking all types of renewable energy, the grid, carbon removal, carbon capture, different types of community scale resiliency technologies, industrial decarbonization, food and ag, land use, transportation. I'm sure I'm leaving some stuff out, but it really is an incredibly
Kind
wide
of across the
range
whole
of
spectrum.
things. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity then, I guess for, prior to Trump coming into office, would you say that there was quite a lot of activity across all of those major areas? And then is it safe to assume that most of that has been kind of scaled back to a large extent, or are there still areas that, unsurprising or maybe surprising to some of us that are actually still, having a lot of funding opportunities?
Well, I think I want to definitely make the point that I think people talk about quote unquote grant funding synonymously with federal grant funding. And I think it's important to stipulate that kind of for the purposes of this conversation, certainly we're talking to a large degree about federal funding, but the US federal government is only one funding entity in it, literally an entire world of funding entities. And so I think there's certainly been a lot of well publicized reduction in grant funding and public funding from the US federal government, but that doesn't mean that there isn't other funding that's available. And most of those other sources have not decreased, and some of them are actually increasing in response to the federal government decreasing.
Interesting. Okay.
That said, yeah.
So I was just going to say, so broadly speaking, there's a lot of other entities. Do you have an idea of what the other entities provide, like percentage wise? Let's talk about just the U.S., right? So whether it's philanthropies or states or local governments, like what's the percentage that those provide versus the federal government usually?
So if we're talking about climate specifically, just to give you a bit of a sense. So the federal government during the Biden administration was providing the vast majority, right? We're
I
talking
see.
with the new climate bills over 110 billion a year just dedicated to climate from the federal government alone. Before the latest bills with the Biden administration, we're talking about probably 28 billion a year or so from the federal
Okay.
government spent on climate, and then a few billion from state governments, and then a few hundred million from other
I
sources.
see.
So
Okay.
federal government in the United States certainly like it has the lion's share, but is not exclusively,
I see.
not the exclusive funder.
Okay.
But with regard to your other question around like what has the funding trend been, like there was a very well publicized funding freeze that got struck down by a judge a couple days later, but it had a pretty significant chilling effect. They also are just right now still going through the process of doing a top to bottom review of literally every single grant program in the federal government
Mm.
with kind of a special scrutiny for climate related programs. So that's programs that were supposed to come out and haven't come out. These are programs that were released but hadn't received
Yeah.
applications. These are programs that have had people apply but hadn't announced yet, and even programs that had funded awards and had folks with contracts. They also are reviewing those, and the
Yeah.
majority of those with contracts have survived. Although there have been some pretty high profile cancellations recently. And then, but many of the programs that were either out and were pending award announcement or were potentially going to come out, the majority of those were cut.
I see. Okay. Interesting. So, yeah, a little bit of a somber situation. I was just going to make one comment, then we can move on to this NOI. Is that I wonder if it would have been in everybody's best interest to not necessarily call these climate related grants, because might be a little bit, they might be perceived differently, right? Like a lot of these, they are obviously related to climate, but I think that there was other industries that were directly affected by them, and I think that this mining one is an example of that, where it's like, hey, if we had been thoughtful about how we created this in the first place, instead of trying to get people really hyped about the fact we did climate stuff, focus on other areas where it's like the marketing or the branding of it wouldn't have been climate centered, and it might have had a better chance of staying and being bipartisan. So maybe something worth, I don't know if there's any policy people who really listen to this, but let's get into this then. So explain to us what exactly is this NOI, what does it cover? Just give us the high level summary and how this kind of fits into federal funding context, and why they're funding it now if they're cutting back on so many things.
Yeah, absolutely. So this announcement actually covers 5 different notices of intent, announcing plans to release 5 different specific funding opportunities or notices of funding opportunity, or NOFO. All but one, actually, unsurprisingly, are continuations of existing programs that were developed and released under the Biden administration. And I say unsurprising. It takes a lot of time and effort to design and develop these programs. And while they've been in office, for a while here, it would have taken them a lot longer to develop all of these. And then also they're all but one are funded with IIJA, or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or bipartisan infrastructure law funding that was not clawed back during the recent reconciliation.
So just in other words, to make this clear, this is not necessarily, none of this is new, or maybe one of them is new, but the rest of it is just continuation.
Essentially, yeah.
I
There
see.
is one new one.
Okay.
So the new one is called Mines and Metals Capacity Expansion for piloting byproducts of critical minerals and materials recovery at domestic industrial facilities. So a bit of a mouthful here. This one is around funding pilot scale projects that will recover critical minerals and materials from existing mining, smelting, refining, industrial facilities, from byproducts from those facilities, and then enabling us to expand domestic capacity without new mining infrastructure.
I see. So if somebody's creating something like this right now, they're just trying to incentivize people who are going to develop solutions to actually capture the waste products, or maybe do recycling, correct?
Yeah, so from
Okay.
existing industrial infrastructure, correct.
Okay.
There will be 50 million total within this NOFO. That will be multiple awards with a maximum of 15 million each. So there, you'll see, several folks will be able to win under here. The release is expected to be in October of 2025, and we're mid-August, so that's actually pretty soon.
Yeah.
They're looking at industry-led partnerships. So private sector companies to lead, but they really encourage the use of teams with universities, national labs, other technology providers. I mean, with any, and that really goes for any of these funding opportunities, like you're going to need a number of well-developed partners in order to do this. And then obviously they're looking for industry-led partnerships, and a large industrial player like a mine, like a smelting plant or a finer processor has to be involved in it, because that is, that's where the byproducts are coming from.
So in other words, if you're a startup trying to get access to some of these things, probably first of all, don't call it a climate thing. Second of all, find a partner who has some kind of operation, and then partner with them in their solution. And you could be, maybe you're coming out of a university, but basically, you've got the startup, they've got the facility, and that's going to give you a better odds of landing the grant. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
I
I
mean,
see.
yeah, in order to kind of properly structure the project design, though, that kind of outline that you, or partnership structure that you outlined with a technology provider. In most cases, they are a startup because they are looking at
Yeah.
emerging technologies in collaboration with one of these larger industrial players, as well as university or national lab or others to support validation and other services.
Okay, got it, got it. So this is really quickly then. So I guess is this something? This is the new one you said. This is the new one that came
This
out.
is the one. Yes, this is one that's new. That's not based on a previous program.
Okay, got it. So in other words, people should probably get in touch with you really soon for help trying to land this money, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably, once the NOFO is released, they may give you their generous 3 months to apply, but for large scale opportunities like this, the you really need to start as early as you can, and that's one of the
Mm,
reasons they put these notices of intent out, to
I see.
enable you to do things like design the project, figure out the teaming, and also during this period where there is a notice of intent, the agencies are much more likely to be able to talk to you about it. And we always encourage
Mm,
folks to do engagement with the funding agency if they haven't already, especially in this environment where it's a new administration. We're all still trying to figure out, like, what are the things that we don't know that they're looking for, that are not written in the NOI or will
yeah.
not be written in the NOFO. This period is actually a really critical period for developing some of these relationships and kind of getting this crucial information. I will note that the Department of Energy has way fewer people working there than they did before, so it may be a little bit more difficult to get a hold of someone there. So working with folks like us that do have some of those inside connections can be
Nice.
helpful.
Nice, very nice. Hey there, quick interruption. As you're listening to this, you can probably tell it's not an easy thing to assemble the type of team that can build these projects and develop this type of technology. So if you are on the hunt for any of these really, technical individuals, reach out to Earth Tech Talent today. As you probably know by now, I run Earth Tech Talent as the way I actually pay the bills. No, this podcast doesn't quite cut it. And one of our core specialties is actually finding unicorn talent, or needle in a haystack talent, as we like to call it. And these types of searches are the ones where there's only usually, 5 to 12 suitable candidates in the market who are also open to the compensation that you have to offer, and who can, relocate to where you're based. In many cases, these people are not in your backyard. So we take it all off your plate by doing a very thorough qualification of what you're looking for and what you need. And then we search under every rock until we find you that gem. And the best part, we structure our pricing specifically for clean tech startups that are strapped for cash. We charge roughly half of what other firms charge. And on top of that, most of our customers say that the quality of our service and our candidates we provide are actually way higher. So half the price, better quality, it's kind of a nice deal. If you are interested in getting started, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, or go to earthtechtalent.com/contact. That's techtalent.com/contact. All right, back to the show. So, okay, so before we move on to this, I guess I should say on this point, who can access this? Is it just going to be one of those partnerships? Are there other restrictions on who's able to actually get access to some of this grant funding?
I mean, I think the primary, in terms of an eligible entity that has the requisite partners and the requisite project structure, I mean, that those are the primary
Okay.
restrictions. They do need to be U.S. companies. I guess that would be the other companies and entities. That would be the other restriction. They do have what they call foreign entity waivers as part of a lot of these large DOE grants. Those were given out pretty liberally for a lot of programs in the previous administration. I don't imagine that they will be given out quite as liberally during this one. And so you're probably looking at, entirely U.S.
Yeah.
teams.
Okay.
And this is really focused on specific materials, so rare earth elements, battery materials, semiconductor specialty materials, PGEs, and demonstrating specifically cost competitive recovery of these critical minerals in a pilot stage setting.
Okay, interesting. Got it. That's really helpful. So then I guess we should touch on as well the other programs that were continued. Can you just kind of remind us of what those were, or what those are, I should say, and again, who accesses them? What's that look like? What's the landscape?
Absolutely. So this next one is called the Critical Minerals and Materials Accelerator. So this one is done under the Advanced Materials and Manufacturing Technologies Office, and you will see that there are multiple offices involved here. So it really is a full DOE effort with these different NOIs. This one is aimed at funding projects that will accelerate the commercial viability of solutions that are strengthening these U.S. supply chains for rare earths, again, battery materials, semiconductor materials. They have a 50 million total available for the program. They say it'll be over multiple awards. They don't specify how much. I would anticipate that, based on what the type of activities they're looking for, maybe, you may be seeing awards over 10 million potentially. This one also will be released in October of 2025. And again, looking for industry-led partnerships with teaming with, other industrial players, technology providers, universities, labs. And this one is really kind of around, the acceleration word is doing a lot of work here. So it's really around technology maturation and scale up. So advancing, refining, separation, processing technologies for a variety of critical minerals and materials around like rare earth magnet supply chains, refining and alloy materials for semiconductors, direct lithium extraction and separation, and then also with co-production of these value-added products from byproducts and scrap from these facilities.
Yeah, can you just imagine if they had called this a circular economy bill? That all of their friends would be upset. But this is basically what it is, right? This is why I find it interesting. I think I don't know. I can't speak for Soma, but I was definitely a lot more optimistic that things wouldn't be so bad under Trump because I thought of all these specific issues. I was like, well, if they want to combat China, we'll have to do all these things. And I was wrong in a lot of ways. But at least this one, maybe I was right on to an extent. So this is helpful. So just in general, core things for people to keep in mind is like it has to be, this is all about US supply chain. So you got to be US company, have a partner. And in general, you want to line those up very quickly before October, because that's when you can start applying for these, right? So if I understand this correctly, they announce it now to get some interest, give you a bit of time to get some partnerships lined up. Then you can apply for in October, and then they give you a certain window of time before they decide who's going to get the money.
Yep, exactly. So, the NOFA will come out sometime in October, although I have to say, you've always had to kind of take these release dates with a bit of a grain of salt, and with fewer and fewer people in DOE have to take them with even a greater grain of salt. So I would not be surprised if the NOFA actually came out in November or potentially even in December. And then, the timelines for review are getting longer as well, but taking them at their word, expecting it sometime in October, perhaps late October, and then having, 2 to 3 months to put the whole thing together.
Now, is there any mention throughout this NOI of why they're doing this? Because I just wanted to bring this up as a word of caution, perhaps, to the startups. Like, did they explain their reasoning why they're continuing these things or kind of promoting this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, China is dominating the processing of these materials, like 70-90% for a lot of these minerals, and the US has dramatically reduced and practically eliminated a lot of its infrastructure over the past 30 years essentially. And so there's a need to onshore these domestic supply chains. And under the Biden administration, we talked a lot about the clean energy transition and protecting domestic industries. Under the Trump administration, we're talking about energy dominance and and dominating competitiveness with other countries and U.S. Competitiveness. But it really boils down to the same thing: is onshoring these supply chains to protect U.S. industry.
Yeah. So I was just curious because what I can imagine is that there's probably a decent number of startups in this space who are, maybe they've changed now, but maybe they were oriented towards the climate solution side of things because, climate was tied to renewables, which needs minerals, Obviously, those minerals are needed in many other places, but I would just imagine if you're a startup now, you might want to be cautious about how you're positioning yourself right now. You might want to be orienting more towards, just call it, domestic supply chain excellence or something, or you might even have to go into the defense space for some of this, right? So, a lot of people might be up in arms about this, but you might have to figure out different ways to present yourself, because they are very, very anti-climate, as is evident by a lot of the things I've been hearing, just in terms of how they handle things, right? Anything that has the word climate in it, they really don't like, even if it doesn't, even if it makes sense for their objectives. So just keep that in mind if any startup founders are listening, how you're pitching yourself and what industry you're saying that you're in as you go for this, right? I don't know
Yeah.
if you have anything to add there.
I mean, there's always been a need to kind of frame the way that you're operating in a certain way to suit the objectives of the funder. But those objectives have stayed relatively consistent across funders and across different time periods. I think that, with this new administration, it is very different, right? So you are, as you said, wanting to position your company as, with specifically as like a critical minerals and materials company,
Yeah.
or advanced manufacturing, or resource recovery leader, right? You want to be focusing on not on like greenhouse gas reductions, but reducing reliance on foreign supply chains. And as I said, kind of strengthening U.S. industrial capacity, competitiveness. And then instead of emphasizing things like, support for disadvantaged communities, you are emphasizing energy independence and jobs for American workers and cost-effective domestic production. And a lot of this language has been, put out, and you can figure out how to mirror that, whether that is in these actually the NOIs themselves, or they will also be in the NOFO, also in some of the executive orders that have been put out. I think that generally some folks say, de-emphasize climate. I think just don't talk about climate in these applications, period. It just
Yeah.
is not necessary for these. And they are actually like literally doing control F in the
Yeah.
agency for specific words in applications. So whether it's in like applications that have gone in or are now going in there, because there are active people applying actively to programs in the federal government right now. They are also doing that for ongoing projects to figure out which ones to reject or terminate. And a lot of those have to do with like DEI and social justice, and of course they can't apparently write about women in NSF anymore. But the climate and decarbonization words are in there too. If you do want to talk about what we would consider climate related benefits, you are going to want to kind of frame them as a co-benefit and talk about them in different ways, like waste valorization, or like energy efficiency, or like supply chain resilience. And I think one thing that we have found, in doing some of these projects, is that it is important, especially, with the way that the markets are trending. Like you can actually use your climate benefit as evidence of long-term market viability and competitiveness, but not necessarily a inherent benefit in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then tie it to like competitiveness and like national resilience, rather than leading with decarbonization.
Yeah.
Language.
I just really hope people take notes of this, because this is really critical. No pun intended. What are I don't think we listed it out, but could you also list out the actual metals if you have that, or if you're aware of which metals specifically are kind of they're targeting here? Do you have the names?
Yeah, so there are a really wide range of metals within each different NOI that are covered. So I guess it's actually
Give us some of the highlights, yeah. And then I would say if you
Yeah.
have anything that you've published on this, let's just link that in the show notes so they can see the specific names, but maybe
For
just
sure.
cover a couple of the high level ones.
Yeah. So like, I think the kind of key like cross-cutting priorities that show up in almost all the NOIs are rare earth, the various rare earth elements and in lithiums. And these really kind of underscore the primary demand drivers in this area, right? Magnets and batteries, and then also, on the defense side. In the CM, the critical minerals and materials accelerator, and a couple of these other ones are really looking like semiconductor related minerals, gallium, germanium, silicon carbide, and many others. So yeah, we can also kind of help. We can also link to some of these like longer descriptions. So I'm not just listing a bunch of minerals, but there are definitely some like commonalities between the different NOIs.
Okay.
But it will be that's one of the things that you need to be very careful about when you're applying, because that's, the type of mineral that you're going after. Like that's a disqualifying factor if you aren't going after a mineral that's specifically listed in
Listed.
the info.
Okay, got it. So that's helpful. And then I guess one thing, just because I'm not super familiar, this is something that is, is this certain that this will go through, or is it like high chances that this will go through this funding, or is it just kind of could it be walked back if they wanted to?
So, I mean, it's a good question, especially in this administration. I think what I would say is there's a high likelihood that it will go through at this point, but it's not guaranteed. So basically, an NOI, a notice of intent, is essentially like DOE informing, or whomever, whichever federal agencies, informing everyone that they're planning on releasing funding. So they've already done a lot of work on this. They've gone through a lot of approvals and development processes, and this is not just kind of lowly DOE staffers that have been working on this. Like the political appointees have signed off on it. To generally they've there's appropriated money that backs it. Like they found the money for it. In many cases, these programs are actually explicitly called out in the law, certainly in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And most NOIs, once they reach the NOI stage, most of them do become
Okay.
opportunities, but they do retain the discretion to delay or cancel them. I think between now and what needs to and the actual the release of the NOFO, they still need to do kind of like the final details of program design, details of eligibility, looking through the establishing the evaluation criteria, and then they have to clear internal reviews at DOE. And of course that there was a recent executive order around changing the grant process, and so I think those barriers on the internal reviews are probably higher, although the people that are the political appointees doing those reviews have already been involved in the development process. So it's not going to be a surprise to them what's in here. And then they also have to coordinate with OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, on funding alignment. So I think if you are, a policy nerd and have kind of paid attention to the details of what's going on, OMB is driving a lot of this kind of ideological purity stuff. So
Because everything flows through there, correct?
Yeah. So OMB review may actually be less of a kind of rubber stamp than it has been in the past. But I think I would put it at 80 to 90% plus chance that this funding will happen, at least most of them.
Got it. So aside from those, like what are the NOIs that were mentioned in this announcement?
Absolutely. So there's another one that is a continuation of a Biden-era program. There already have been a couple of rounds. This one is around battery materials processing and battery manufacturing and recycling. So this funds pilot or commercial scale facilities, so potentially large facilities that process, manufacture, and recycle critical battery materials. Again, building a secure domestic supply chain and reducing reliance on all these foreign refining and recycling entities. So they're going to be giving out a total budget of $100 million over multiple awards, potentially as much as $20 million per award. This one also will be released, the NOFO, in August. Sorry. This NOFO will also be released in October of this year. And again, U.S. industry-led teams, whether those are, those recyclers, processors, battery manufacturers, again, teamed with laboratories, universities, and then other technology providers, like many of these climate tech companies are. The projects are expected to be integrated with or adjacent to these commercial operations. So, those larger scale industrial players are kind of positioned as the primary leads. And what they're looking for is these processing and refining pilots, so scaling domestic production of the critical battery materials themselves, lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, and those are from like virgin materials, right? Ores, concentrates, synthetic feedstocks. And there's also these recycling demonstrations, which is recovery of these battery grade materials from end-of-life batteries, manufacturing, scrap, other industrial residues. And then they also have some downstream work that's eligible as well. So like manufacturing integration, enabling closed loop systems that kind of connect new battery manufacturing with recycling outputs.
Okay, got it. That's comprehensive. That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely have seen a number of these battery recycling companies that have been struggling in the past. So hopefully this gives them a bit of a boost. And then I think there was what, one or two more.
Two more, yeah. So the next one is the rare earth elements demonstration facility. So this one is 135 million. There will be a single award for a single large demonstration facility. And so for the ones that they have a single large award, I typically recommend that folks always engage with the funder directly to make sure that they are, because the odds are longer, and sometimes they do have someone in mind, and so the risk is a lot higher if you're not engaging directly with the funding agency. So I certainly recommend in this notice of intent period, prior to the NOFO release for this one again, which is going to be in October, that you reach out to the funding agency, and this will be a single demonstration plant, first of a kind facility that will process and separate rare earth elements from unconventional and secondary domestic sources. So exclusively waste streams, and turning that into to a reliable supply chain. Again,
And does it say anything about what waste streams are in that bucket? Because I mean that could be a lot of different things.
yeah, so talking about rare earth elements only, so light and heavy rare earth elements that are used in magnets, clean energy technologies, defense applications. And again, as with several other notices of intent, they're looking for industry-led teams. So the demonstration facility has to be integrated with commercial operations where it secures that waste. So the commercial operations being mining companies, processors, separation technology firms, and others. So those will be the primary lead. And then, again, labs, universities, other technology providers will be teaming with them.
Okay, got it. And then what's that last one?
Yeah, so the last one is an ARPA-E funding opportunity on rare earths characterization. So this one is very high up in the value chain for technologies that enable rapid characterization of rare earth and critical mineral deposits. So the budget is not specified. We anticipate the NOFO to be released a little bit earlier than the others. And this is really around developing technologies for rapid resource assessment within a large area. So hard rock, rare earth enriched clays, seafloor deposits, as well as methods for drilling, sensing, quantitative analysis. So really, again, like very much on the upstream, discovery.
Basically, identifying these deposits, basically. So our
Yep,
friends at Durin will probably be on that one. So is there anything else that you would share around that one specifically?
Not on that one. I think the last thing that I would say around, enumerating these specific NOIs is that there has been some confusion around the ARPA-E Recover program. So they included the ARPA-E Recover program in the announcement, the beginning announcement of all of these notices of intent. And a lot of people read that to mean that the ARPA-E Recover program was going to be published and was a forthcoming program. It is not a forthcoming program. It is actually under... the concept papers were submitted late last year, and the full applications were actually are due this month in about a week. So I think they just included that in the announcement because it was thematically in line with these notices of intent. So I've seen a few people saying, there's this forthcoming ARPA-E Recover program. So just wanted to make sure that everyone knows this is not a forthcoming program. This is something that where they will be announcing the winners later this year.
I see. Okay, got it. Cool, man. Well, that's really helpful. I mean, it would make sense because a lot of the things they talk about, it seems like these definitely line up very closely with what really matters to them. So I would be a tad surprised if they really pull away from that. So I mean, again, we can't be too surprised with anything in this administration. But
yeah, I mean, it also follows specifically on like a couple of executive orders. There was one like unleashing energy dominance, the one on the first day, and then there was one in March that was specifically around declaring an emergency and requesting this exact type of demonstration for critical minerals.
Okay, got it. So the next thing I think would be helpful to just try to understand is, and we sort of touched on this already, but broadly speaking, what is the exact what are the exact infrastructure gaps that we're trying to shore up? Because you mentioned that basically over the past 30 years, give or take, we've kind of been offshoring all this. So like, what are the core areas that they're trying to shore up with it? And just like, what is your perspective broadly on what really needs to happen if the U.S. Does intend to secure its supply chains and become more, I guess you'd say, independent?
Yeah, so I mean, there's kind of the physical gaps, especially kind of in the middle, but really throughout the entire value chain. And then there's the kind of commercialization gaps as well for the technology. So it's kind of twofold, right? So like on the physical side, like the US essentially has almost no domestic capacity for refining, separating most of these critical minerals. Like almost all of that is in China. We're missing, battery recycling plants, even systems, just basic systems for industrial byproduct recovery. We just don't have those integrated systems at these industrial facilities, whether those are like mines or other industries. The Chips and Science Act under Biden, tried to was intended to onshore a lot of this, semiconductor manufacturing, but we don't have the capability to produce a lot of the critical minerals and materials here. So there's just like a big gap in physical infrastructure. And then, on the kind of commercialization gap there, we're missing these mid-scale plants that are, between the lab and full commercial plants that really are able to prove out these new recovery and processing technology. So you'll note that a lot of these notices of intent are around, pilot and demonstration facilities, which are targeting that exact gap.
So,
And I
just in
think,
other words, so to make sure it's understood, it's like this technology kind of exists out there a lot, but it's mostly bench scale. It's a very, very small amount, and there needs to be demonstrations to get it to that next level, which can then go to commercial scale.
yeah. I mean, I
Okay.
think in various stages of applied R&D, and some of it has been piloted, but I would say most of it is not ready for prime time.
Mm,
The other thing I guess I would mention is that, obviously with the whole like industrial and innovation ecosystem, it's not just kind of the physical materials, but it's also like the technical expertise and education,
mm,
and all of this. So like, these also represent investments in workforce and in education and R&D, right? You're involving these universities, you're having these, you're involving national labs, you're involving all these different partners, some nonprofit research institutions as well, and others. And so it is, certainly not as much as the Biden administration focused on this, but there are some elements of, uh, you know, starting to invest in those, infrastructure gaps as well,
mm.
soft infrastructure gaps.
So this might be a question that you're not super familiar with. I'm just curious if there are other, because it seems as though the administration likes to do more so tax incentives instead of the actual money into things. So I'm curious, do you know if there's any other tax related incentives that are related to these spaces where the larger organizations can get write-offs for investing in these things as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a huge, a huge amount of what was in the recent reconciliation bill that just passed, was what to do with all of the different tax credits. And so they did end some of the tax credits early. They did bring in the sunset on some of them, but there are still both investment and production tax credits for some of these, technologies. So
Mm,
absolutely, having an integrated fundraising strategy, which is, grants and equity investment and other forms of non-dilutive funding, especially non-dilutive public funding, those things are critically important. And just in the last year or two, we've helped our clients get over 100 million in these IRA tax credits. So it's really,
mm.
really important for climate tech in general. And I guess, these, if you don't want to call it climate tech, you can call it critical minerals companies.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. I think this is gonna be interesting. Where well, I'll talk about it another time. But no, this is fascinating. So another thing would be, how does, I guess, this strategy or this focus from the current administration in the U.S. How does this compare, broadly? Because you guys work around the world. So what is it looking like in Europe? Are they doing the same thing, the same type of investments, doubling down? Like, what's the broader landscape?
Yeah, so this is very much in line with, it's a clear global funding trend towards providing significant funding for critical minerals and materials. We're seeing not just the U.S., but the EU is pouring billions into this. Canada, other places like Japan, Korea, Australia as well. A lot of these countries kind of have the same issue with pretty much everyone outsourced their critical minerals and materials processing to China. So everyone's kind of trying to onshore them in this kind of less geopolitically secure environment that we find ourselves. In Europe, you're seeing funding, significant funding from the EU from programs like Horizon Europe. We're doing a bunch of those right now. There's a big round out. The Innovation Fund, which is a 38 billion euro fund that funds first of a kind plants, and some of that is battery recycling. For example, the last call from last year was 3.4 billion, and we anticipate one at least that big coming out again in December. There's national funding from places like Germany, France, Nordics, most of the European countries as well to some degree. Canada, has the Strategic Innovation Fund and other programs, and so really across the board, they're to varying degrees certainly, but the U.S. and Europe are certainly the biggest, but to varying degrees, this is really a pretty clear funding trend.
So I mean, even if you're building something in this space, I mean, it's not like you have to rely on just landing a U.S. grant, right? Your point would be that there's opportunities everywhere. Maybe the others have similar, domestic components to them. I'm assuming, but I would assume in some cases they're probably open to an American startup versus a Chinese startup, for example. So I can imagine that there's a little bit more flexibility in some of those, but. That I just want to point this out because I think it's sometimes overlooked that usually people think about their current market of where they're based to build these things. And in some cases, I remember talking about this, I think, in the context of some like shipping fuels creation and some things in hydrogen, whereas like it was substantially more beneficial to go look at South Korea or Japan or something for these pilots because they were putting a lot of money into this. So one other thing that came to mind is this is broadly with the world, but also in the U.S. in particular. You mentioned about talent, like some of these people don't exactly exist. So is there any provisions or any knowledge about when these things happen? Like, do they typically make allowance for getting visas in the country from other people from other countries where the talent does exist?
Yeah, I think that this administration has the last administration had a much more kind of like international collaboration focus and kind of considering onshoring as onshoring in the United States and perhaps in Canada and other allies. Even though it was primarily focused on the U.S., this administration definitely does not have that, and I think are generally hostile to immigration of any kind. So there's I think less of a focus than perhaps there could or should be in creating this talent, and less of a focus within the funding opportunities on talent creation than there was in the last administration. But we haven't seen the NOFOs yet, so I'm hopeful that there will be additional funding opportunities there. And they did cancel some large workforce development programs, but it's certainly possible that some of those will come out again, just be released by this administration in a different flavor.
Yeah. Now I would be curious because I can imagine that you kind of need these things to walk in line with each other. Otherwise, you might struggle because you can call for these things, but if you don't have the necessary knowledge, you might be in a tough situation. So hopefully the partnerships with the universities will help. Out
Yeah, I
of
mean
curiosity,
that's what real industrial policy is all about, right? And I think we've really kind of had a lack and a dearth of integrated industrial policy that in the United States, like many other countries have had, like China, like Germany. Doing work in Germany is like incredibly eye-opening. They have such incredible coordination and integration between all the different pieces of their economy to support these things. And so I think the last administration did a really good job of starting to bring that back. And with these notices of intent and some other things, I'm hopeful that this administration will continue that to some degree.
yeah. So you keep a good pulse on, I guess, generally kind of where things are headed. It seems as though largely, things have been focused initially on scaling back spending and getting rid of programs. But now we have got this kind of first. I'm assuming it's like one of the first major kind of positive directions, if you will, because they have something that they're trying to give money out for. Do you have any idea if you were to kind of predict, like, if there are other areas where we might see other types of funding? Again, it may not be climate related, but any other kind of trends that you see based on the current administration's objectives?
Yeah, so they've been pretty explicit with the areas that, at least at the Department of Energy, that they're planning on providing funding. So critical minerals and materials is one of them. They've also been very clear that they intend to fund geothermal energy, nuclear energy, hydropower, grid technologies, AI and data center related opportunities, and then all kinds of things related to coal and gas. So those are kind of their stated funding priorities. So I was certainly glad to see that these notices of intent with had a total of $1 billion. I don't think I was expecting that, but we definitely were expecting some funding to come out in this area. So I think we should expect funding in those other areas to be coming out as well, even if it's perhaps not as much. Although some of the nuclear funding opportunities we may actually see something bigger.
Substantial.
There are some other areas like agriculture, transportation, that are more bipartisan and less ideological, where we're already seeing money from the Department of Transportation and USDA coming out even before a lot of money was coming out from the Department of Energy. There was $100 million AI lab related opportunity that came out the other day from National Science Foundation. So again, and kind of in line with the administration's priorities. So I think we generally know what the administration's priorities are going to be on a broad scale. We kind of know what they're not going to be. Generally, like funding things like EVs and wind and solar. And then there's a lot of other technologies that are somewhere in the middle that it kind of remains to be seen. There probably won't be a ton of funding, but there may be some funding for carbon capture or clean fuels or other things like that.
Yeah, it just kind of seems like now is a good time. Now that it seems, it's not, I wouldn't say things have settled down, but it seems as there's somewhat of a clear direction of where things are headed. Now, climate tech companies can get their footing properly because I mean, we're recording this a couple weeks before Climate Week's going to happen, so I think there'll be a lot of discussion around that coming up. How to go forward. But one last thing I think I would want to ask you is, again, applying for grants is one way to be able to get money to fund pilots or whatnot. But from your perspective, working with a lot of different startups in the past, are there any core, I guess, pieces of advice that you would share on how to bulletproof the startup so that even if they end up not being able to land some of those grants, they still have kind of the core components in place to succeed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the best kind of high level advice I can give on this side is just to be as strategic as possible, certainly with your funding strategy, and be able to think about taking advantage of the entire capital stack. So we've talked about a few of these different things today. So there's obviously these grants. There are, the tax incentives that we were talking about, and it doesn't necessarily have to be federal tax incentives. They can be state tax incentives. There can be local tax incentives. There is, a variety of government-related debt financing at different levels, different levels of government. There's still a lot of funding from state agencies. Understanding how potentially some sort of like philanthropic catalytic capital might work as part of your capital stack, and then how those things integrate with the equity investment. Obviously, it's not a very easy equity investment environment either, which makes it even more important to kind of strategically understand how these different types of capital really fit together, what you can use, what you can and should be using the different types of capital for, how to enable each one to kind of mitigate the drawbacks of the other, because they all have benefits and drawbacks. And the key is really how you put them together, effectively. And then, and a lot of that has to do on the non-dilutive side with really just identifying the right opportunities, being able to effectively assess and down select those, and then understanding what part of your technology roadmap and your pathway to commercialization and scale you can fund with this type of funding that has a much more specific utilization, and then how you fill the gaps in your capital stack with other forms of funding like equity investment.
Yeah. That's helpful. And I think, I guess just maybe the last word on this stuff would be, if you want to raise equity right now, there is still plenty of money being funded, but you have to be one of the best companies, or you have to have you have to have
Mhm.
you have to have a real product that saves people money, or it's substantially better in some way. So just, I think it's important, if anybody's still got any delusions of, the focus is GHG emissions and everything. Yes, that is the focus for what we're doing, but it's not the focus for the commercial side of things, right? They don't really care about that. Um, Unfortunately. So you have to focus on what's commercially viable. So just for anybody listening, if you have a commercially viable product, I don't think obviously grant funding is going to be very helpful, but you'll still succeed if you have a really, really strong product that's strong demand. So anything else that you want to share, man? This has been really, really helpful. I think that we covered a lot. Anything else you want to plug or reference people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of in line with the comment about being really strategic with the overall integrated fundraising strategy. It's really important to be strategic with every single element of that capital stack, and making sure that you're not just applying to grants that come across your desk opportunistically, but really being comprehensive in the your identification of grants, being really having doing a really fulsome assessment of the funding opportunities, engaging with the funders to the extent that you can prior to submitting funding opportunities, do having a funding strategy, and wrapping all of those things up into uh, and typically what we try to tell our clients is to apply for fewer funding opportunities that have a higher dollar value and a higher chance of success. And so a
Mhm.
lot of that does involve pre-work. And we do have this software platform we're calling Grant Monitoring Service that enables companies to be matched with funding opportunities that are relevant for them in real time. And so that is something that's kind of a key tool that folks can use to stay abreast of the funding opportunities that are out there, and have us help them assess whether those are relevant. And there's always a human in the loop at every stage of that process.
Yeah, I think increasingly this is a sidebar, but anybody who's focusing on that, I see this a lot more. The branding, like human in the loop, instead of just AI, because people are becoming increasingly upset about the lack of quality that AI products do. But that's a whole other conversation, man. But this has been really helpful. I'm really excited for what you guys are doing, and I thank you for breaking this down for us. I think it'll be very helpful for many founders. So looking forward to seeing how things evolve, and I'll definitely have to turn notifications on for your LinkedIn posts. And I would encourage anybody else to do so as well.
Yeah, appreciate that.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a share on social media. There's a lot of other founders listening who could really benefit from this. So please do share it. Give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform if you enjoy it. And if you're feeling extra generous, give us a subscribe on YouTube. There's a lot of, we don't really have any special visual stuff on YouTube, but some people like to watch there, and it can also really help us kind of get more reach if we get a lot of subscribers on YouTube. So go do us a favor and help us out. We also do love any feedback. So if you have any guests you'd like to hear from, things you don't like about the pod, or things you really want to hear more about, just drop a message to us directly on LinkedIn. You can comment on the Substack post as well. But thank you again so much for tuning in. Thank you for being loyal listeners. And we'll see you next time on the podcast. Oh, and one last thing. Don't forget to keep an eye out for, very soon, we'll be announcing our Climate Week event. So I'm committing to it now. It's on the record. We have something coming for you. Just stay tuned for that in the coming, hopefully, days. By the time you hear this, we'll have some nice announcements for you. All right. Thank you, guys. See you next time.